So with the release of Spider-Man Far From Home, it's time to update some lists, and the first list we're talking about is all of the Spider-Man movies ranked. Spider-Man, Spider-Man. What is up, Flick fans, and welcome back to my channel. Today I am ranking all of the Spider-Man movies. There are currently 8 of them. I'm not including Venom this time. We're just focusing on the character of Spider-Man, but I'm very excited to talk about this. I need you guys in the comments section down below. What is your favorite Spider-Man film? What's your least favorite? And are you excited for Spider-Man Far From Home? Speaking of which, that's kind of the reason why I'm doing this today. I want to thank my cousin Joseph, who lives in Orlando, Florida, for allowing me to use his awesome comic book man cave. That's where I'm filming this video today, and I call it the best list, but it's really just my list from least favorite to most favorite. Everybody's opinion is going to differ, and that's why I want your comments down below. Do you agree? Do you disagree? Do you prefer the Raimi Spider-Man films? Do you prefer the new Spider-Man films? Or even the Mark Webb Spider-Man films? I'm interested to see which movies you guys like the most. Okay, let's rank them. And my list starts all the way down at the second Andrew Garfield film. This is The Amazing Spider-Man 2, a movie I was very excited for because while I didn't love the first one, I still enjoyed it, and I was excited to see where this franchise could go. Andrew Garfield is really good as Spider-Man, especially in this movie. His chemistry with Emma Stone is great. There are certain subplots for me that work really well. I thought the death of Gwen Stacy was handled well, that one moment, but within all of these other moments and the convoluted film that it was, the entire thing, the entire experience, it falls flat, especially when you go back and think about it. And this movie actually got worse for me on rewatch. It was a bit higher on this list, but it's like the more I go back and watch it, the more I think about it, the less it matters in the long run. And yes, Spider-Man was rebooted, all of these things, but Spider-Man was rebooted. We still look back on certain other Spider-Man films in prior universes as, oh my gosh, that movie's awesome. Amazing Spider-Man 2 is the most forgettable. It's the most convoluted. Jamie Foxx's Electro was a big miss for me, and then you shoehorn in all of these other villains. Guys, this movie doesn't work. It just doesn't. Some people enjoy it for the fun factor, and it is there. Andrew Garfield is really good as Spider-Man. It's just his movies, they're not the best. I'm not going to say I've come around on Spider-Man 3, right? But I do like it a bit more than I used to. I'm still not saying it's a good movie. It's very messy. There are elements in there that completely bog it down and take it to a level of just, you had your chance and you just blew it. Why would you make this specific decision? Why would you make Tobey Maguire this strange, completely different character? Yes, he had the symbiote, so it was supposed to take him to a dark place, but it didn't feel like it took him to a dark place. It felt a bit awkward to me, and the entire second into the third act of the movie is just a big mess. And like Amazing Spider-Man 2, they shoehorn in all of these villains. You have James Franco's character turning into a villain. You have the Sandman, who I actually thought was served pretty well. I enjoyed the character of the Sandman, but then you throw in the Venom that just doesn't work as Venom. Tom Hardy is a great Venom. Regardless of how you feel about the movie, this didn't work. Topher Grace was not the guy to play Venom. He was miscast, and that, along with all of these other things, just took me out of the movie, and the third act is not the most entertaining third act I've ever seen, guys. Spider-Man 3 was a disappointment, albeit it has good elements in there, and you can't help but like Tobey Maguire in this movie because the memes and some things are just so funny. Next up is the original, the OG of Andrew Garfield Spider-Man. Not the original Spider-Man. Listen, this was okay. I look back on it and I enjoyed the experience. I liked elements about it. They changed up just enough to make it feel a bit fresh, even though looking back on it now, you're like, yeah, it does feel more familiar to the original Spider-Man than it should have. It's not like there's too much they can do when retelling an origin story, but you have the casting of Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy. Just two of the best castings in a comic book movie that I had seen at that point. Right now, we have all of these other movies in the MCU, and they're all so exciting, and the casting is great. But at that point, I'm like, yeah, Andrew Garfield is great, even though he's like 27 years old. He could be a good Peter Parker, and he was. He embodied the new kind of skater boy mentality because that's what that character would have been in that time period, all of those things. The movie is not as concrete as I would want it to be, and the Lizard is a bit of a forgettable villain, and then they started to set up things, and I know they have a major setup game in Amazing Spider-Man 2 where they try to shoehorn in the Sinister Six. In this movie, it's not as bad, even though it's clearly present. There are things about this movie I would easily have changed just to make it a better film, but Amazing Spider-Man was fun enough at the time, and it set up for a potentially successful sequel. Now, this is the OG. This is the original Sam Raimi Spider-Man film, the one that really started it all. And I say started it all, like it was one of the first comic book movies, that and X-Men, and I guess right after that, well, a few years, Batman Begins, but all of those films kind of started this transition into what we have now with the MCU and where the DCEU is going. It really was just one of the first major blockbusters, and I remember watching this movie as a very, very young kid, just blown away, because I had grown up with the really cheesy, I believe it was like 70s, 80s, horrible special effects Spider-Man show. It was live action, right? You guys probably haven't even heard of it. That was awful. But as a kid, I loved it because I was obsessed with the character of Spider-Man. Obsessed. And then I see this film, and it blows me away. I fell in love with Green Goblin. I thought Willem Dafoe was incredible. And then you look at Tobey Maguire's casting, and now, yes, he's in the memes and all of these things, but he really was great in the movie. He over-exaggerates his expressions sometimes, but that really works for what this character was, and he portrayed Peter Parker better than anyone could have imagined him portraying him. Guys, I look back on this movie, and it's just thoroughly entertaining for me because it has that nostalgia factor, I will admit, and there are certain things about it that are a bit dated, and I will say that. But overall, I really enjoy Spider-Man. It's the first movie on this list where I can truly say I kind of love it. I love the first Spider-Man. I love a lot of Spider-Man movies. We are so just spoiled with quality films, right? We see a movie and we're just like, oh, that didn't live up to my expectations. It's not as good as I wanted it to be. But guys, we're living in an age where we get comic book movies that are just so high quality nowadays. And where did all those come from? Not necessarily, not 100% Spider-Man, but Spider-Man was a major factor in that. Next up on this list is Spider-Man Far From Home. Now, I know I'm going to get flack for putting it below Spider-Man Homecoming. I know I'm going to get flack for putting it this low. It's number 4, right? This low on this list. But I love the movie. I think the movie is great. Right now, it is in a really good place for me because I know I like it more than the first Spider-Man. I don't necessarily know if I like it. Clearly not as much as Spider-Man Homecoming yet. There are some rewatches to be had because the more I rewatch these movies, the more my feelings change, right? This list has changed multiple times every time I redo it. And Spider-Man Far From Home is a movie, even though I've seen it once, it warrants a rewatch. And don't worry, I'm not going to spoil anything because I know when I'm filming this, the movie is not technically out yet. But I think you guys are going to have so much fun with Spider-Man Far From Home. There are so many great elements in it. And here's what I love about the movie, without diving in too deep because I just did a review for it. This is a film that starts out in a very familiar setting. And I don't mean physically because clearly they're not New York anymore. And I like that, right? It's not the same old Spider-Man that we get all the time. But I mean the comedy and the humor and that teen aspect from Homecoming, right? But then, like, halfway through the movie, everything changes because something happens in this film that I think may divide some fans, but I think the majority, it's going to be a crowd-pleasing film, and people are going to love this and eat it up. If you're a fan of the comic books, this is a very comic booky Spider-Man film, and I think a huge reason why I love this movie so much is Jake Gyllenhaal. Every time Jake Gyllenhaal was on screen, he was spectacular, guys. This is a movie that really takes what we love about Spider-Man. It just throws it up on screen in a good way, in a concrete way, not in a sloppy way, and it is truly an entertaining time at the theater. The post-credit scenes, oh my goodness. Listen, if you're a fan of Spider-Man, you're going to thoroughly enjoy this film. My reasoning for putting it below Homecoming is because I think Homecoming, the pacing was a bit better. I thoroughly enjoyed the villain of Vulture. I thought Michael Keaton was fantastic, and I just think that movie has this special feeling to it, but not everybody's the biggest fan of Homecoming, and if you're not the world's biggest fan, I think you're going to enjoy Far From Home more because while it starts out like Homecoming, even though I think the pacing in Homecoming is a bit better than the first third of this movie, it slowly turns into something different. And that's the reason why this movie is fighting with Homecoming for me, because it's so different. It's something we haven't seen in a long time, and it brings together so many things in the MCU and kind of sets up something more, guys. Far From Home is a great time. I can't wait for you guys to see it, for you guys to put your comments down below and let me know if Far From Home exceeded your expectations. Now, like I said, it's fighting with Homecoming. Those two movies, next time I do this list, you may see them switched, but I had a thoroughly great time with Homecoming, the one that set up Far From Home. I truly think this movie is special. And I know a lot of people look at it and say, well, he's just Iron Man Jr. It's too CGI and there's things that don't work. And yes, I do miss the web swinging from the other Spider-Man films. I miss elements that made those movies great, but we've already had those Spider-Man movies. I don't want a rehash of something we've had so far. I want something new. I want something fresh. I want something different. And the fact that Spider-Man's in the MCU and he had that storyline with Tony Stark, I thought this was the perfect route to take him. Yes, I don't think the Iron Spider suit is perfect for him all the way through the MCU, right? I'd like to see him go back to his roots as Spider-Man, but once you guys see Far From Home, you'll see that we're starting to get back to those roots. This film really gave us something different and fresh and new. And the thing I love most about it is, one, I think the pacing is just great. It's so crisp all the way through. You're just locked in. But then you have this John Hughes-esque film that kind of pulls things from Ferris Bueller and The Breakfast Club and that style of humor, but it works so well. And I never thought I would say this for Spider-Man and for his friends who were actually high schoolers that were cast, not 30-year-old men. I just think Homecoming is so entertaining. I think the action in Far From Home is better than Homecoming. That's my one big complaint, is there's not an action scene that I look back on and go, oh, okay, that was great. But the tension between he and the villain, you look at that scene with Michael Keaton in the car when he starts discovering that he is Spider-Man. That's what I love about this movie. It's more the dialogue and the conversations and the building of these characters, guys. Spider-Man Homecoming knocked it out of the park for me. It's thoroughly entertaining, and it's just fun. I had a friend who just went and watched it for the first time the other day. He said, man, Spider-Man Homecoming is a blast. And I said, yeah, and you're going to love that along with Far From Home. It's just really cool to have him in the MCU. Once again, we're living in a good time. Let's move on. As much as I really enjoyed Homecoming and Far From Home, I just can't do it, man. Spider-Man 2 is what I consider the OG in terms of quality. And I think Spider-Man 1's a great movie, but Spider-Man 2 just took what worked about that film and surpassed it and brought us one of the coolest and best, most entertaining, most sinister villains we have ever seen in Doc Ock. Alfred Molina's Doc Ock is amazing. And I just went back and watched the train scene the other day. The train scene in that movie is one of the most entertaining comic book fight scenes I've ever seen. Sure, some of the CGI, it doesn't necessarily hold up all the way, but you look at the time period and how good it did look at that time and how thoroughly entertaining this film is. The score is phenomenal. It's still the OG Spider-Man score. Nothing can beat it. Absolutely nothing. And I think this is one of those, you're going to look back on it, you're going to say, if there is a way to pull people back, to go back to the old Spider-Man, even though we've had all of these interpretations, this is the one to do it, because this is a high-quality story that integrates all of these different storylines from the comics. There's an intensity, and Tobey Maguire comes into this role and knocks it out of the park in this film. It's sad, it's intense, the love story is handled really well. J. Jonah Jameson is awesome. Sam Raimi directs this film. He brings in the elements of horror that we love from his other movies. Guys, Spider-Man 2 is just awesome. If you haven't seen it in a while, I encourage you, go back, check it out. For me, it's the OG. But as of a few months ago, there's now a new #1, Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Blew me away. And I keep saying that about all of these movies. This movie blew me away, blew me away. But this is one that I was going in with moderate expectations. I had huge expectations for every single live-action movie, but this one I'm like, yeah, you know what? We'll see what it does. We'll see if it surprises me. And walking out of that film, my friend and I, we were just silent because we were so blown away with the character exploration, with the way that they integrated the music, the visuals. It's just, it all comes together to create this perfect package. If you haven't seen it, first off, this is great timing because it just dropped on Netflix. Guys, if you haven't seen Spider-Verse, turn off everything, stop watching this video, go turn on Netflix and go watch it, because it is the perfect Peter Parker story. It's the perfect Miles Morales story. It's the perfect Gwen Stacy story. It's the perfect Peter Porker Spider-Man noir story. I mean, Penny Parker, all of these characters come together. It is like the Avengers of the Spider-Man world. It's beautiful game-changing animation, honestly. It's a little blurry at times. It takes your eyes a bit to adjust, but once they do, guys, I think you're going to be completely enamored by this film. It's just one of those movies that grows on you. When I first watched it, I'm like, oh yeah, this is absolutely one of my favorite movies of the year. And at this point in time, looking back at 2018, it is my de facto #1 favorite movie of last year. It's one of my favorite comic book films of all time. I could say that about the top 3 or 4 on this list, one of my favorite comic book movies of all time. But no, Into the Spider-Verse, I believe it cracks my top 5, top 6, and that's really impressive. Out of all of the movies that we've got, to have an animated Spider-Man film blow you away to this degree, Miles Morales, his story is awesome, and there's so much potential for where this could go in the future. So many things that you could bring in, so many villains that work. And everything comes together, like I said, to create this monumental Spider-Man experience. If you're afraid to watch it because it's an animated movie, do not let that deter you, because the themes in this film go beyond even things that we have seen in a live-action Spider-Man movie. And at the end of the day, guys, Into the Spider-Verse is very clearly my #1 right now. But if we get something that surpasses it, maybe when Spider-Verse 2 comes out, I will be the happiest man alive. Guys, we've had some great Spider-Man movies, and let's use this as a time to celebrate the Spider-Man films. So don't just comment your lists, or if you're excited for Far From Home, let me know, what are your favorite moments from the Spider-Man movies? Are you happy with the direction that we're going? And what do you think about Spider-Man in general? How do you feel about him as a hero, guys? Let's have a Spider-Man discussion in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching this video. This was so much fun. Once again, thank you to my cousin Joe for allowing me to use his room to do all of these videos in. He is awesome. This is awesome. I love celebrating Spider-Man. Are you guys excited for Far From Home? Leave that like if you enjoyed this video. It really helps out this channel. And later on, I'm probably going to do a best and worst of June. We have some very special reviews coming out next week. Maybe some more Marvel-centric videos. We will have to see. You guys are the best, and I'll see you very soon.